My brother stalked and attacked my girlfriend at a wedding, and instead of supporting me, my parents defended him. Now he's sitting in prison for domestic violence. My name is Alex, and for 28 years, I have lived in the long, distorted shadow cast by my younger brother, Samuel. Our story isn't one of simple sibling rivalry, it's a chronicle of systematic manipulation, parental enabling, and a descent into a darkness that very nearly cost me the one truly good thing in my life, my girlfriend Victoria. The incident that shattered the fragile illusion of my family life occurred at a family dinner, the first time I introduced Victoria to my parents and Samuel. I had been with Victoria for 8 glorious months, a period that felt like coming up for air after a lifetime of drowning. She is 25, a pediatric nurse with a compassion that seems to radiate from her very core. We met by chance in the hospital cafe, bonding over the uniquely terrible coffee, and from our first real date, I knew she was different. She was light and stability, everything my family was not. Because of this, I had kept our relationship a secret for the first 3 months. It was a necessary precaution, a lesson learned from bitter experience. Samuel had a history of sabotaging my relationships. With my last girlfriend, he'd spun a web of lies about a non-existent gambling addiction. With another, he'd claimed I was a serial cheater. Each time, my parents either defended his actions as brotherly concern or accused me of being overly sensitive. Their favorite refrain was, "He just looks up to you so much, Alex. He doesn't know how to express it." Victoria, ever the optimist, encouraged me to give them a chance. "People can change, Alex," she'd said, her hand warm in mine. "We're all adults now. Maybe it will be different." I wanted to believe her, so I agreed to the dinner. From the moment Victoria, 25 and radiant in a simple summer dress, walked through my parents' meticulously decorated front door, Samuel's behavior was a masterclass in inappropriate obsession. He was 25, but possessed the predatory focus of a man who had never been told no. He practically shoved our mother aside to be the first to greet her, enveloping Victoria in a hug that was too tight, lasted too long, and left her visibly stiff and uncomfortable. She had to physically step back to break his hold. Throughout dinner, his fixation was a relentless, humming current beneath the surface of polite conversation. He kept finding excuses to touch her, a hand on her arm to emphasize a point, a squeeze of her shoulder as he passed behind her chair. He told bizarre, fabricated, inside jokes that made no sense, as if trying to create a false history of intimacy between them. He repeatedly shoved past my chair to refill her water glass or offer her a bread roll, each time maneuvering to sit closer to her. The climax of his dinnertime harassment was when he tried to feed her a bite of dessert from his own fork, leaning in with an intense, unblinking stare. Victoria's polite smile was stretched thin, a mask of discomfort she wore for my sake. She later told me she felt like a specimen under a microscope. Simultaneously, Samuel launched a campaign of character assassination against me. He regaled the table with twisted, embellished, or entirely fabricated stories from our childhood, painting me as a pathetic, unstable fool. The most egregious was a detailed account of how he had to save my high school girlfriend from my emotional abuse, a complete fiction. Victoria, who knew the true, mundane stories of my teenage years, shot me confused and concerned looks. My parents, however, simply nodded along, their expressions a mixture of fond indulgence and weary resignation, as if Samuel were reciting gospel truth. After dinner, the situation escalated from uncomfortable to terrifying. Victoria, ever the helper, offered to assist with cleaning up. I was in the garage helping my dad move some boxes, when a cold dread settled in my stomach. I hadn't seen Victoria for about 15 minutes. Excusing myself, I went to look for her. I found her in the kitchen, cornered by the sink. Samuel had her physically blocked in, his body a barrier between her and the doorway. He was standing far too close, one hand planted on the counter next to her hip, caging her in. His voice was a low, insistent murmur. "You deserve someone more exciting, Victoria," he was saying. "Someone who can really appreciate you. My brother is so boring, so unstable. He's never been able to keep a woman happy. But I could. "I've asked you to back off twice, Samuel," Victoria said, her voice trembling but firm. "Please move." That's when she saw me over his shoulder. The relief that flooded her face was instantaneous and heartbreaking. She ducked under Samuel's arm and rushed to my side, her entire body shaking. Samuel just laughed, a hollow, performative sound, and raised his hands as if it were all a big joke. But I could feel the fine tremors running through Victoria, the cold fear in her hand as she gripped mine. That night, as we drove back to her apartment in a heavy silence, I knew the tentative peace I had built with Victoria was about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. To understand the depth of this dysfunction, you need to understand our family dynamic. Samuel and I grew up in an upper-middle-class family in a small, picture-perfect town in Minnesota. Our parents, both successful real estate agents, were masters of curating a flawless external image. The perfectly manicured lawn, the expensive cars, the smiling family photos, all of it was a carefully constructed facade hiding a deeply rotten core. Samuel was born when I was 3, and from that moment, he became the sun around which our family orbited. He could do no wrong. Every transgression was excused, every malicious act reframed as an accident or a misunderstanding. When he was 6, he deliberately smashed my gaming console with a hammer because I wouldn't let him play. My parents' solution wasn't to punish him, it was to buy him his own console and scold me for not being a more generous older brother. When he was 12, he killed my pet hamster by feeding it chocolate, knowing it was toxic. I found the tiny, lifeless body in its cage. My parents called it a tragic accident and told me I shouldn't have pets if I wasn't prepared to watch them more carefully. In high school, he systematically spread rumors that I was cheating on my girlfriend, a campaign of whispers and forged messages that ultimately destroyed our relationship. My parents dismissed it, saying, "He was just being protective of her. He has a big heart." This pattern continued into adulthood. Samuel still lived at home, working sporadically at my dad's real estate office, bankrolled by our parents to live a life of leisure and petty cruelty. He was the golden child, perpetually coddled and shielded from consequences, while I was cast as the jealous, problematic older sibling. Meeting Victoria was my salvation. She was the first person who made me feel seen and valued for who I was, not as a counterpoint to Samuel. She knew my entire history because I had laid it bare for her, wanting her to be armed with the truth. Her response wasn't to run, but to hold me closer. "We're a team, Alex," she'd say. "We'll handle it together." But after the dinner, handling it became a full-time job. A few days later, Victoria began receiving strange, silent calls, just heavy breathing on the line before a hang-up. Then came the texts from unknown numbers, calling her stuck-up and frigid for rejecting a better option. The messages soon escalated, containing specific, chilling details. What she was wearing on specific days, the time her shift ended, the make and model of her car. Someone was watching her. I recognized the tactics. The phone numbers, though unknown, were linked to a group of Samuel's old high school friends, a pack of sycophants who still orbited him, funded by the allowance our parents provided. They were his foot soldiers. When Victoria blocked the numbers, new ones would appear. Then, the harassment moved to her workplace. Samuel's friends began loitering in the pediatric ward, pretending to be visitors, their eyes fixed on her for hours. They would make comments just loud enough for her to hear, "Looks tired today," or "Wonder what her problem is." The situation reached a crisis point one night after her shift. One of them, a hulking guy named Tyler, followed her to her car in the dimly lit hospital parking garage. He didn't touch her, just stood and watched as she fumbled with her keys, his presence a silent threat. She was so terrified she called me, sobbing too hard to drive, convinced he would follow her home. I had to race to the hospital, my heart pounding in my throat, and drive her car home while a friend followed us to ensure we weren't tailed. Victoria began having panic attacks before her shifts. The stress was eating her alive. Her once bright eyes were shadowed with constant anxiety. I finally had enough. I compiled a dossier of evidence, recordings of the voicemails, screenshots of the texts, and security camera footage from the hospital clearly showing Tyler and his friends stalking the corridors of her ward. Armed with this proof, I went to my parents' house to confront Samuel. He was lounging on the sofa, the picture of indolent arrogance. I laid it all out for him. The photos, the recordings, the footage. He listened with a smug, infuriating smirk. When I finished, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "I have no idea what you're talking about, bro. But maybe if Victoria wasn't such a stuck-up bitch, people wouldn't feel the need to teach her a lesson." Something primal and long-suppressed snapped inside me. My fist connected with his face with a sickening crunch. He immediately crumpled, wailing as if I'd mortally wounded him, though it was little more than a bloody nose. The reaction was instantaneous. My parents came running, and as always, they saw only Samuel's performance. My mother descended into hysterics, cradling her baby boy and screaming at me. My father, his face purple with rage, got in my face, screaming about my uncontrollable jealousy and anger issues. When I tried to shove the evidence into their hands, my mother shrieked, "She led him on. That little tease led him on at dinner, and now she's playing the victim." My father pointed to the door. "Get out of my house. Don't you dare come back until you've apologized to your brother and gotten your head on straight." I left, my hands shaking not from fear, but from a profound, soul-crushing rage and helplessness. I was writing the initial post seeking advice from Victoria's apartment, watching her finally cry herself to sleep in the next room, terrified of what the next day would bring. Her supervisor was being understanding, but her job, her passion for helping sick children, was hanging in the balance. I was at my wit's end. How do you protect someone you love from a monster your family insists on dressing in angel's wings? Part 2. The system fails, the family attacks. The response to my initial post was overwhelming. Strangers from across the internet offered validation, advice, and a sobering perspective on the severity of our situation. The most common refrain was to document everything and pursue legal action. It gave Victoria and me a sense of direction, a plan in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. We spent days meticulously compiling our evidence into a formal, organized file. We had sworn statements from 3 of Victoria's co-workers who had witnessed the stalking. We had a timeline of events, maps of the hospital with the stalker's routes highlighted, and a folder of every threatening text and voicemail. We walked into the local police station feeling a fragile sense of hope. The officer we spoke to, a weary-looking man in his 50s, seemed initially concerned. He flipped through our file, his brow furrowed, especially at the workplace harassment evidence. Then, I made a critical mistake. I mentioned Tyler by name, identifying him as Samuel's primary accomplice. The change in the officer's demeanor was immediate and chilling. "Tyler? Tyler Briggs?" he asked, his voice losing all its professional concern. "Yes," I said, a knot forming in my stomach. "He's been the most persistent." The officer leaned back in his chair. "Look," he said, his tone now dismissive. "Tyler's father is Sergeant Briggs. Good man. Without direct, concrete proof that your brother is orchestrating all this, there's not much we can do. It sounds like maybe your girlfriend is misinterpreting some friendly attention. These boys hang out at the mall, the hospital, it's what they do. Are you sure she didn't encourage it in some way?" I felt the floor drop out from under me. We were being gaslit by the police. We asked to speak to a different officer, specifically a female officer, but were given a bureaucratic runaround. In the end, they agreed to issue warnings to the individuals we could identify from the security footage, but it was a hollow victory. We left the station feeling more vulnerable than ever. My family's reaction to our police report was even more vicious than I had anticipated. The day after our visit to the station, Samuel showed up at my parents' house sporting a spectacular black eye, one I had not given him. He claimed I had ambushed him again. My mother called me, sobbing hysterically, accusing me of trying to destroy Samuel's future over a silly misunderstanding. My father was next, his voice a cold, threatening blade. He threatened to cut me off financially, an empty threat given my successful career in software development, and even threatened to fire me from the family business, a job I had never held. Then came the real trap. My mother began a campaign of tearful phone calls and pleading texts. "We need to fix this as a family," she implored. "Samuel is sorry. He understands he was inappropriate. We've talked to him about boundaries. Please, just come for a quiet dinner so we can all apologize and move on. Against my better judgment, and after long, careful discussions with Victoria, we agreed. We were walking into a lion's den, but the desperate, naive hope for reconciliation was a powerful drug. The moment we arrived at my parents' house, I knew we had made a catastrophic error. The house wasn't set for a quiet family dinner. It was packed. My parents, Samuel, my perpetually disapproving aunt and uncle, and my blood ran cold. Tyler and 2 of his stalking companions were all there, arranged in a semicircle of judgment. My mother called it a family intervention. For 2 hours, we were subjected to a coordinated character assassination. My mother led the charge, delivering a long, venomous monologue about how Victoria was clearly jealous of Samuel's good looks and success, and had been shamelessly flirting with him at the first dinner. She claimed Victoria had invented the harassment to cover her own guilt. My aunt chimed in, suggesting Victoria, used to male attention at the hospital, had a guilty conscience, and was misinterpreting friendly behavior. Samuel played his part to perfection, the picture of wounded confusion. I was so excited to have a sister-in-law, he said, his voice dripping with fake sorrow. I just don't understand why she would make up such horrible lies to turn you against me, Alex. Tyler and his friends provided the chorus, swearing they were only at the hospital to visit Tyler's fictitious, constantly relocating grandmother. The most insidious part was their attack on Victoria's mental stability. They pointed to her night shifts as a source of paranoia, her stressful job as a cause for projection. My mother even had the gall to recommend a therapist to help Victoria with her tendency to create drama. Victoria tried to defend herself, her voice calm but strained as she presented the evidence again. They talked over her, dismissed the texts as misinterpreted jokes, and suggested she had provoked the detailed descriptions of her clothing. When my parents invited Tyler and his friends to stay for dessert to show you what nice young men they really are, Victoria's composure finally broke. She began hyperventilating, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and fled to the hallway. When I tried to go after her, my mother grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. Alex, it's time, she hissed, her eyes blazing. Choose. Your real family, or that unstable girl who's trying to tear us apart. The choice was the easiest I have ever made. I choose Victoria, I said, pulling my arm away. We left and drove home in a silence thick with shock and betrayal. The harassment intensified afterward, now targeting Victoria's professional reputation with rumors of mental instability. Her supervisor, though sympathetic, warned her that the disruption was affecting her performance. We hired a lawyer, but the process of obtaining restraining orders was slow and cumbersome. Victoria was offered a lifeline, a job at a hospital 300 miles away, courtesy of a former colleague. The thought of being driven from our home enraged me, but seeing Victoria cry before every shift, her weight dropping from constant anxiety, made the decision for us. We would run, not out of cowardice, but out of necessity. We were building our life raft as the ship was actively sinking around us. Part 3. The Wedding and the Fall. The catalyst for the final, irreversible break was my cousin Holly's wedding. Holly was the sole family member who saw Samuel for what he was. As kids, she had caught him torturing her cat, and though my parents had silenced her then, she had never forgotten. She was firmly on our side. When the invitation arrived, we were hesitant, but Holly called personally. She had only invited Samuel under duress from her parents and had hired extra security specifically to keep an eye on him. She seated us with her husband's family, far from the toxic epicenter of my parents' table. Feeling cautiously optimistic, we agreed to attend. The ceremony was beautiful and uneventful, largely because Samuel was occupied as a groomsman. At the reception, for the first time in weeks, I saw Victoria begin to relax, even laugh. The illusion of normalcy was a precious, fleeting gift. Around 9 p.m., Victoria went to the restroom. When 10 minutes passed and Samuel simultaneously disappeared from his table, a cold dread seized me. I excused myself and headed toward the bathrooms. I was still yards away when I heard her scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that cut through the wedding music. I broke into a run. Just as I turned the final corner, I saw Holly's new husband Miller and his brother, the latter an off-duty police officer from another city, pulling a drunken, enraged Samuel off of Victoria. He had her pinned against the wall, one hand over her mouth, the other gripping her arm so tightly it was already blooming with purple bruises. The shoulder of her dress was torn. Miller's brother immediately called the police while Miller helped a sobbing, trembling Victoria to a private room. The scene that followed was a grotesque parody of family loyalty. As the police arrived, my parents launched themselves into the fray. My mother was screaming about misunderstandings and drunken mistakes, while my father physically tried to block the officers from handcuffing Samuel, insisting they handle this as a family. Samuel, in handcuffs, alternated between weeping that Victoria had seduced him and snarling threats, his face a contorted mask of rage. As he was being put into the squad car, he shouted back at us, "She's a whore. She's been asking for it since the day we met." Several guests captured his entire meltdown on their phones. The aftermath was a nuclear winter for our family. My parents went on a warpath, calling every relative with a fabricated story of how Victoria had lured Samuel away, made advances, and then cried assault when he rejected her. They claimed she had orchestrated the entire event for revenge. They were determined to burn every bridge to keep their golden child from facing consequences. But this time they failed. The wedding videographer had caught Samuel following Victoria. Combined with the bruises, the torn dress, multiple witness statements, and the viral videos of his arrest, the case against him was ironclad. Our lawyer assured us it was a guaranteed conviction. My parents' final act was to threaten to disown me if Victoria didn't drop the charges. They showed up at my apartment, causing a scene that prompted neighbors to call the police. My mother wailed about me sending her baby to jail, while my father threatened my career. Their performance only solidified our resolve. Victoria accepted the job offer. I arranged to work remotely. We packed our lives and left the state, moving to a new city 300 miles away. We were not running away, we were moving toward a future they could not poison. The hardest part was the grim certainty that my parents would never change. Even after witnessing a violent assault, they chose the lie over the truth. The cycle ended with us. Part 4. Silence and then the reckoning. For 4 years, we built a beautiful, peaceful life. The silence from my family was a blessing. Victoria and I married in a small, joyful ceremony surrounded by Holly and her family and Victoria's relatives. We bought a house. Victoria excelled in her career, becoming the head pediatric nurse at her hospital. I thrived in my remote role. We were happy truly and completely. Then 3 months ago we welcomed our daughter, Emma. Holding her tiny, perfect form, I felt a love so fierce it terrified me. It also crystallized my resolve. She would never know the toxicity I had endured. She would be surrounded by love, respect, and safety. It was in this new, fragile state of parenthood that the past came calling. My mother, from a new number I didn't recognize, left a hysterical voicemail. Her voice was shattered, desperate. Against my better judgment, I called back. Through heaving sobs, she revealed that Samuel had gotten married a year prior to a woman named Rachel, in a union arranged through their church. My mother had been ecstatic, believing Samuel had finally found a good Christian woman to settle him. But the fantasy had collapsed the previous week. Rachel's coworker, alarmed after she missed 3 days of work, had called for a welfare check. The police found Rachel severely beaten, broken ribs, a fractured wrist, a canvas of bruises. As the investigation unfolded, a more horrifying truth emerged. My father had been Samuel's chief enabler, using his business connections to threaten Rachel's family and her job whenever she tried to leave or speak out. He had even convinced her parents she was mentally unstable, using the same script they had used against Victoria. The final beating had been triggered by Rachel getting a promotion that would have given her financial freedom. When she called my dad for help, his advice was to put ice on it and remember her wedding vows. It was her coworker who ultimately saved her. Both Samuel and my father were arrested. My mother, now utterly alone in the ruins of the life she had helped create, was begging me to come home, to support the family. She even had the audacity to suggest Rachel was exaggerating, just like Victoria. I lost my composure. I unleashed 28 years of pent-up anger and pain. I listed every failure, every enabled act of cruelty, from the murdered hamster to the assault at Holly's wedding. I asked her if she finally saw that their protection had created a monster who now put other women in the hospital. She broke down completely, offering a tearful, fragmented admission. We always knew he had problems. We thought we were protecting him. I'm so sorry, Alex. It was the apology I had waited my whole life for, but it tasted like ashes. It was too late. The damage was irrevocable. I hung up and blocked the number, my hands shaking not with anger, but with a profound, weary sadness. Through Holly, we learned the full story. Samuel took a plea deal and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. My father's case was ongoing, his reputation and business in tatters. The most shocking development was my mother. She had finally started therapy, moved out, and filed for divorce. She even sent me a long, handwritten letter of apology, acknowledging her role in the creation of this tragedy. We also, through Holly, reached out to Rachel to offer support. Victoria, with her immense capacity for empathy, insisted. She needs to know she's not alone, she said, holding our sleeping daughter. We know what it's like to be gaslit by that family. I haven't responded to my mother's letter. A part of me pities the broken woman she has become, but the father in me looks at Emma and knows that my primary duty is to her safety and well-being. Allowing my mother, even a remorseful one, back into our lives would be a risk. It would be a crack in the door through which the past could slither back in. The cycle of abuse and enabling that defined my family of origin ends here, with me. It ends with the family I have chosen and built. Emma will grow up knowing only love, respect, and healthy boundaries. Sometimes, the most profound act of love is a definitive, final goodbye. Our peace was hard-won, and I will protect it with everything I have.